This Fremen religious adaptation, then, is the source of what we now recognize as the pillars of the universe, whose Kizarat, Hoth, Tafwid are among us of all signs and proofs and prophecy. They bring us the Arakeen mystical fusion, whose profound beauty is typified by the stirring music built on the old forms, but stamped of the new awakening. Who has not heard and been deeply moved by the old man's hymn? I drove my feet through a desert, whose mirage flooded like a host. Voracious for glory, greedy for danger, I roamed the horizons of Al-Kulab, watching time-level mountains, in its search and its hunger for me. And I saw the sparrows swiftly approach, bolder than the outrushing wolf. They spread in the tree of my youth. I heard the flock in my branches, and was caught on their beaks and claws, from Arrakis awakening by the Princess Irulan. The man crawled across a dune top. He was a mote caught in the glare of the noon sun. He was dressed only in torn remnants of a juba cloak. His skin bared to the heat through the tatters. The hood had been ripped from the cloak, but the man had fashioned a turban from a torn strip of cloth. Wisps of sandy hair protruded from it, matched by a sparse beard and thick brows. Beneath the blue within blue eyes, remains of a dark stain spread down to his cheeks. A matted depression across moustache and beard showed where a steel-suit tube had marked out its path from nose to catch pockets. The man stopped half across the dune crest, arms stretched down the slip face. Blood had clotted on his back and on his arms and legs. Patches of yellow-grey sand clung to the wounds. Slowly he brought his hands under him, pushed himself to his feet, stood there swaying, and even in this almost random action there remained a trace of once precise movement. "I am Liet Kynes," he said, addressing himself to the empty horizon, and his voice was a hoarse caricature of the strength it had known. "I am His Imperial Majesty's planetologist," he whispered, "planetary ecologist for Arrakis. I am steward of this land." He stumbled, fell sideways along the crusty surface of the windward face. His hands dug feebly into the sand. "I am steward of this sand," he thought. He realized that he was semi-delirious, that he should dig himself into the sand, find the relatively cool underlayer, and cover himself with it. But he could still smell the rank, semi-sweet esphers of a pre-spiced pocket somewhere underneath this sand. He knew the peril within this fact, more certainly than any other Fremen. If he could smell the pre-spiced mass, this meant the gases deep under the sand were nearing explosive pressure. He had to get away from here. His hands made weak, scrabbling motions along the dune face. A thought spread across his mind, clear, distinct. The real wealth of a planet is in its landscape, how we take part in that basic source of civilization, agriculture, and he thought how strange it was that his mind, long fixed on a single track, could not get off that track. The Harkonnen troopers had left him here without water or stillsuit, thinking a worm would get him if the desert didn't. They had thought it amusing to leave him alive to die by inches at the impersonal hands of his planet. The Harkonnens always did find it difficult to kill Fremen, he thought. We don't die easily. I should be dead now. I will be dead soon. But I can't stop being an ecologist. The highest function of ecology is understanding consequences. The voice shocked him because he recognized it and knew the owner of it was dead. It was the voice of his father who had been planetologist here before him. His father long dead, killed in the cave-in at Plaster Basin. "Got yourself into quite a fix here, son," the father said. "You should have known the consequences of trying to help the child of the Duke." "I'm delirious," Kynes thought. The voice seemed to come from his right. Kynes scraped his face through sand, turning to look in that direction. Nothing except a curving stretch of dune dancing with heat devils in the full glare of the sun. "The more life there is within a system, the more niches there are for life," his father said, and the voice came now from his left, from behind him. "Why does he keep moving around?" Kynes asked himself. "Doesn't he want me to see him?" "Life improves the capacity of the environment to sustain life," his father said. "Life makes needed nutrients more readily available. It binds more energy into the system through the tremendous chemical interplay from organism to organism." "Why does he keep harping on the same subject?" Kynes asked himself. "I knew that before I was 10. Desert hawks, carrion eaters in this land, as were most wild creatures, began to circle over him. Kynes saw a shadow pass near his hand, forced his head farther around to look upward. The birds were a blurred patch in silver blue sky, distant flecks of soot floating above him. "We are generalists," his father said. "You can't draw neat lines across planet-wide problems. Planetology is a cut-and-fit science." "What's he trying to tell me?" Kynes wondered. "Is there some consequence I failed to see?" His cheeks slumped back against the hot sand, and he smelled the burned rock odor beneath the pre-spiced gases. From some corner of logic in his mind, a thought formed. "Those are carrion-eater birds over me. Perhaps some of my Fremen will see them and come to investigate." "To the working planetologist, his most important tool is human beings," his father said. "You must cultivate ecological literacy among the people. That's why I've created this entirely new form of ecological notation." He's repeating things he said to me when I was a child, Kynes thought. He began to feel cool, but that corner of logic in his mind told him, "The sun is overhead. You have no stillsuit and you're hot. The sun is burning the moisture out of your body." His fingers clawed feebly at the sand. "They couldn't even leave me a stillsuit." The The presence of moisture in the air helps prevent too rapid evaporation from living bodies, his father said. Why does he keep repeating the obvious? Kynes wondered. He tried to think of moisture in the air, grass covering this dune, open water somewhere beneath him, long qanat flowing with water across the desert, and trees lining it. He had never seen water open to the sky except in text illustrations. Open water, irrigation water. It took 5,000 cubic meters of water to irrigate 1 hectare of land per growing season, he remembered. Our first goal on Arrakis, his father said, is grassland provinces. We'll start with these mutated poverty grasses. When we have moisture-locked in grasslands, we'll move on to start upland forests, then a few open bodies of water, small at first, and situated along lines of prevailing winds with wind-trapped moisture precipitators, spaced in the lines to recapture what the wind steals. We must create a true sirocco, a moist wind, but we will never get away from the necessity for wind traps. Always lecturing me, Kynes thought. Why doesn't he shut up? Can't he see I'm dying? You will die too, his father said, if you don't get off the bubble that's forming right now deep underneath you. It's there and you know it. You can smell the pre-spice gases. You know the little makers are beginning to lose some of their water into the mass. The thought of that water beneath him was maddening. He imagined it now, sealed off in strata of porous rock by the leathery half-plant, half-animal little makers, and the thin rupture that was pouring a cool stream of clearest, pure, liquid, soothing water into a pre-spice mass. He inhaled, smelling the rank sweetness. The odor was much richer around him than it had been. Kynes pushed himself to his knees, heard a bird screech, the hurried flapping of wings. This is Spice Desert, he thought. They must be thrown about even in the day sun. Surely they can see the birds and will investigate. Movement across the landscape is a necessity for animal life, his father said. Nomad peoples follow the same necessity. Lines of movement adjust to physical needs for water, food, minerals. We must control this movement now, align it for our purposes. Shut up, old man, Kynes muttered. We must do a thing on Arrakis never before attempted for an entire planet, his father said. We must use man as a constructive ecological force, inserting adapted terraform life. A plant here, an animal there, a man in that place, to transform the water cycle, to build a new kind of landscape. Shut up, Kynes croaked. It was lines of movement that gave us the first clue to the relationship between worms and spice, his father said. A worm, Kynes thought with a surge of hope. A maker's sure to come when this bubble bursts, but I have no hooks. How can I mount a big maker without hooks? He could feel frustration sapping what little strength remained for him. Water so near, only 100 meters or so beneath him, a worm sure to come, but no way to trap it on the surface and use it. Kynes pitched forward onto the sand, returning to the shallow depression his movements had defined. He felt sand hot against his left cheek, but the sensation was remote. The Archean environment built itself into the evolutionary pattern of native life forms, his father said. How strange that so few people ever looked up from the spice long enough to wonder at the near-ideal nitrogen-oxygen CO2 balance being maintained here in the absence of large areas of plant cover. The energy sphere of the planet is there to see and understand. A relentless process, but a process nonetheless. There is a gap in it, then something occupies that gap. Science is made up of so many things that appear obvious after they are explained. I knew the little maker was there, deep in the sand, long before I ever saw it. Please stop lecturing me, father, Kynes whispered. A hawk on the sand near his outstretched hand. Kynes saw it fold its wings, tip its head to stare at him. He summoned the energy to croak at it. The bird hopped away 2 steps, but continued to stare at him. Men and their works have been a disease on the surface of their planets before now, his father said. Nature tends to compensate for diseases, to remove or encapsulate them, to incorporate them into the system in her own way. The hawk lowered its head, stretched its wings, refolded them. He transferred its attention to his outstretched hand. Kynes found that he no longer had the strength to croak at it. The historical system of mutual pillage and extortion stops here on Arrakis, his father said. You cannot go on forever stealing what you need without regard to those who come after. The physical qualities of a planet are written into its economic and political record. We have the record in front of us now, course is obvious. He never could stop lecturing, Kynes thought. Lecturing, always lecturing. The hawk hopped 1 step closer to Kynes' outstretched hand, turned its head first one way and then the other to study the exposed flesh. Arrakis is a one-crop planet, his father said. One crop. It supports a ruling class that lives as ruling classes have lived in all times, while beneath them a semi-human mass of semi-slaves exists on the leavings. It's the masses in the leavings that occupy our attention. These are far more valuable than has ever been suspected. I'm ignoring you, father, Kynes whispered. Go away. And he thought, surely there must be some of my Fremen near. They cannot help but see the birds over me. They will investigate if only to see if there's moisture available. The masses of Arrakis will know that we work to make the land flow with water, his father said. Most of them, of course. will have only a semi-mystical understanding of how we intend to do this. Many, not understanding the prohibitive mass ratio problem, may even think we'll bring water from some other planet rich in it. Let them think anything they wish, as long as they believe in us. In a minute I'll get up and tell him what I think of him, Kynes thought, standing there lecturing me when he should be helping me. The bird took another hop closer to Kynes' outstretched hand. 2 more hawks drifted down to the sand behind it. Religion and law among our masses must be one and the same, his father said. An act of disobedience must be a sin and require religious penalties. This will have the dual benefit of bringing both greater obedience and greater bravery. We must depend not so much on the bravery of individuals, you see, as upon the bravery of a whole population. Where is my population now when I need it most? Kynes thought. He summoned all his strength, moved his hand a finger's width toward the nearest hawk. It hopped backward among its companions and all stood poised for flight. Our timetable will achieve the stature of a natural phenomenon, his father said. Our planet's life is a vast, tidally interwoven fabric. Vegetation and animal changes will be determined at first by the raw physical forces we manipulate. As they establish themselves, though, our changes will become controlling influences in their own right, and we will have to deal with them too. Keep in mind, though, that we need to control only 3% of the energy surface, only 3%, to tip the entire structure over into our self-sustaining system. Why aren't you helping me? Kynes wondered. Always the same. When I need you most, you fail me. He wanted to turn his head, to stare in the direction of his father's voice, stared the old man down. Muscles refused to answer his demand. Kynes saw the hawk move. He approached his hand, a cautious step at a time when its companions waited in mock indifference. The hawk stopped only a hop away from his hand. A profound clarity filled Kynes' mind. He saw quite suddenly a potential for arrogance that his father had never seen. The possibilities along that different path flooded through him. No more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero, his father said. Reading my mind, Kynes thought. Well, let him. The messages already have been sent to my siege villages, he thought. Nothing can stop them. If the Duke's son is alive, they'll find him and protect him as I have commanded. They may discard the woman, his mother, but they'll save the boy. The hawk took one hop that brought it within slashing distance of his hand. It dipped its head to examine the supine flesh. Abruptly it straightened, stretched its head outward, and with a single screech leaped into the air and banked away overhead with its companions behind it. They've come, Kynes thought. My Fremen have found me. Then he heard the sand rumbling. Every Fremen knew the sound, could distinguish it immediately from the noises of worms or other desert life. Somewhere beneath him, the pre-spiced mass had accumulated enough water and organic matter from the Little Makers, had reached a critical stage of wild growth. A gigantic bubble of carbon dioxide was forming deep in the sand, heaving upward in an enormous blow, with a dust whirlpool at its center. It would exchange what had been formed deep in the sand for whatever lay on the surface. The hawks circled overhead, screeching their frustration. They knew what was happening. Any desert creature would know. And I am a desert creature, Kynes thought. You see me, father? I am a desert creature. He felt the bubble lift him, felt it break, and the dust whirlpool engulf him, dragging him down into cool darkness. For a moment, the sensation of coolness and the moisture were blessed relief. Then, as his planet killed him, it occurred to Kynes that his father and all the other scientists were wrong, for the most persistent principles of the universe were accident and error. Even the hawks could appreciate these facts. Prophecy and prescience. How can they be put to the test in the face of the unanswered questions? Consider, how much is actual prediction of the waveform, as Muad'Dib referred to his vision image, and how much is the prophet shaping the future to fit the prophecy? What of the harmonics inherent in the act of prophecy? Does the prophet see the future, or does he see a line of weakness? A fault or cleavage that he may shatter with words or decisions, as a diamond cutter shatters his gem with a blow of a knife. Private Reflections on Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. Get their water, the man calling out of the night had said, and Paul fought down his fear, glanced at his mother. His trained eyes saw her readiness for battle, the waiting whip-snap of her muscles. It would be regrettable should we have to destroy you out of hand, the voice above them said. That's the one who spoke to us first, Jessica thought. There are at least 2 of them. One to our right and one on our left. Signoro Horobosa Sukaras Hin Manj La Vajgavas Doi Mi Kamavas Na Beslas Lere Pal Robas. It was the man to their right calling out across the basin. To Paul, the words were gibberish, but out of her Bene Gesserit training, Jessica recognized the speech. It was Chekobsa, one of the ancient hunting languages, and the man above them was saying that perhaps these were the strangers they sought. In the sudden silence that followed the calling voice, the hoop wheel face of the second moon faintly ivory blue, rolled over the rocks across the basin, bright and peering. Scrambling sounds came from the rocks, above and to both sides, dark motions in the moonlight. Many figures flowed through the shadows. A whole troop, Paul thought with a sudden pang. A tall man in a mottled burnous stepped in front of Jessica. His mouth baffle was thrown aside for clear speech, revealing a heavy beard in the side light of the moon, but face and eyes were hidden in the overhang of his hood. "What have we here? Jinn or human?" he asked. And Jessica heard the true banter in his voice. She allowed herself a faint hope. This was the voice of command, the voice that had first shocked them with its intrusion from the night. "Human, I warrant," the man said. Jessica sensed rather than saw the knife hidden in the fold of the man's robe. She permitted herself one bitter regret that she and Paul had no shields. "Do you also speak?" the man asked. Jessica put all the royal arrogance at her command into her manner and voice. Reply was urgent, but she had not heard enough of this man to be certain she had a register on his culture and weaknesses. "Who comes on us like criminals out of the night?" she demanded. The burnous hooded head showed tension in a sudden twist, then slow relaxation that revealed much. The man had good control. Paul shifted away from his mother to separate them as targets, give each of them a clearer arena of action. The hooded head turned at Paul's movement, opening a wedge of face to moonlight. Jessica saw a sharp nose, one glinting eye, dark, so dark the eye, without any white in it, a heavy brow, an upturned moustache. "A likely cub," the man said. "If you're fugitives from the Harkonnens, maybe you're welcome among us. What is it, boy?" Possibilities flashed through Paul's mind. A trick? A fact? Immediate decision was needed. "Why should you welcome fugitives?" he demanded. "A child who thinks and speaks like a man," the tall man said. "Well, now, to answer your question, my young Wally, I am one who does not pay the fee, the water tribute to the Harkonnens. That is why I might welcome a fugitive. He knows who we are," Paul thought. There's concealment in his voice. "I am Stilgar, the Fremen," the tall man said. "Does that speed your tongue, boy?" It is the same voice, Paul thought, and he remembered the council with this man seeking the body of a friend slain by the Harkonnens. "I know you, Stilgar," Paul said. "I was with my father in council when you came for the water of your friend. You took away with you my father's man, Duncan Idaho, an exchange of friends. And Idaho abandoned us to return to his duke," Stilgar said. Jessica heard the shading of disgust in his voice, held herself prepared for attack. The voice from the rocks above them called. "We waste time here still. This is the duke's son," Stilgar barked. "He's certainly the one Liet told us to seek. But a child still." "The duke was a man and this lad used to thump her," Stilgar said. "That was a brave crossing he made in the path of Shai Hulud." Jessica heard him excluding her from his thoughts. Had he already passed sentence? "We haven't time for the test," the voice above them protested. "Yet he could be the Lisan al-Gaib," Stilgar said. "He's looking for an omen," Jessica thought. "But the woman," the voice above them said. Jessica rated herself anew. They had been deaf in that voice. "Yes, the woman," Stilgar said, "and her water." "You know the law," said the voice from the rocks. "One who cannot live with the desert." "Be quiet," Stilgar said. "Times change." "Did Liet command this?" asked the voice from the rocks. "You heard the voice of the Sialago Jamis," Stilgar said. "Why do you press me?" Jessica thought. Sialago. The glue of the tongue opened wide avenues of understanding. This was the language of Ilm and Fiek. The Sialago meant bat, a small flying mammal, voice of the Sialago. They had received a distrans message to seek Paul and herself. "I but remind you of your duties, friend Stilgar," said the voice above them. "My duty is the strength of the tribe," Stilgar said. "That is my only duty. I need no one to remind me of it. This child man interests me. He is full-fleshed. He has lived on much water. He has lived away from the father's son. He has not the eyes of the Ebad. He does not speak or act like a weakling of the Pans. Nor did his father. How can this be?" "We cannot stay out here all night arguing," said the voice from the rocks. "If a patrol, I will not tell you again, Jamis, to be quiet," Stilgar said. The man above them remained silent, but Jessica heard him moving, crossing by a leap over a defile and working his way down to the basin floor on their left. The voice of the Sialago suggested there'd be value to us in saving you two, Stilgar said. "I can see possibility in this strong boy man. He is young and can learn. But what of yourself, woman?" He stared at Jessica. "I have his voice and pattern registered now," Jessica thought. "I could control him with a word, but he's a strong man, worth much more to us unblunted and with full freedom of action. We shall see." "I am the mother of this boy," Jessica said. "In part, his strength, which you admire, is the product of my training. The strength of a woman can be boundless," Stilgar said. "Certain it is in a reverend mother. Are you a reverend mother?" For the moment, Jessica put aside the implications of the question, answered truthfully, "No." "Were you trained in the ways of the desert?" No, but many consider my training valuable. We make our own judgments on value, Stilgar said. Every man has the right to his own judgments, she said. It is well that you see the reason, Stilgar said. We cannot dally here to test you, woman. Do you understand? We do not want your shade to plague us. I will take the boy man, your son, and he shall have my countenance, sanctuary my tribe. But for you, woman, you understand there is nothing personal in this. It is the rule, Istilar, in the general interest. Is that not enough? Paul took a half step forward. What are you talking about? Stilgar flicked a glance across Paul, but kept his attention on Jessica. Unless you've been deep trained from childhood to live here, you could bring destruction onto an entire tribe. It is the law. You cannot carry useless. Jessica's motion started as a slumping, deceptive feint to the ground. It was the obvious thing for a weak outworlder to do, and the obvious slows an opponent's reactions. It takes an instant to interpret a known thing when that thing is exposed to something unknown. She shifted as she saw his right shoulder drop to bring a weapon within the folds of his robe to bear on her new position. A turn, a slash of her arm, a whirling of mingled robes, and she was against the rocks with the man helpless in front of her. At his mother's first movement, Paul backed 2 steps. As she attacked, he dove for shadows. A bearded man rose up in his path, half-crouched, lunging forward with a weapon in one hand. Paul took the man beneath the sternum with a straight-hand jab, sidestepped and chopped the base of his neck, relieving him of the weapon, and he fell. Then Paul was into the shadows, scrambling upward among the rocks, the weapon tucked into his waist sash. He had recognized it in spite of its unfamiliar shape, a projectile weapon, and that said many things about this place. Another clue that shields were not used here. They will concentrate on my mother and that Stilgar fellow. She can handle him. I must get to a safe vantage point where I can threaten them and give her time to escape. There came a chorus of sharp spring clicks from the basin. Projectiles whined off the rocks around him. One of them flicked his robe. He squeezed around a corner in the rocks, found himself in a narrow vertical crack, began inching upward, his back against one side, his feet against the other, slowly, as silently as he could. The roar of Stilgar's voice echoed up at him. "Get back, you worm-headed lice. She'll break my neck if you come near." A voice out of the basin said, "The boy got away still. What are we? Of course he got away, you sand-brained." "Ah, easy, woman. Tell them to stop hunting my son," Jessica said. "They've stopped, woman. He got away as you intended him to. Great God below. Why didn't you say you were a weirding woman and a fighter?" "Tell your men to fall back," Jessica said. "Tell them to go out into the basin where I can see them. And you'd better believe that I know how many of them there are." And she thought, this is a delicate moment, but if this man is as sharp-minded as I think him, we have a chance. Paul inched his way upward, found a narrow ledge on which he could rest, and looked down into the basin. Stilgar's voice came up to him. "And if I refuse? How can you— leave be, woman. We mean no harm to you now. Great gods, if you can do this to the strongest of us, you'll have 10 times your weight of water." Now, the test of reason, Jessica thought. She said, "You ask after Velissa al-Gaib. You could be the folk of the legend," he said, "but I'll believe that when it's been tested. All I know is that you came here with that stupid Dooku. Woman, I care not if you kill me. He was honourable and brave, but it was stupid to put himself in the way of the Harkonnen fist." Silence. Presently Jessica said, "He had no choice, but we'll not argue it. Now tell that man of yours behind the bush over there to stop trying to bring his weapon to bear on me, or I'll rid the universe of you and take him next." "You there," Stilgar roared. "Do as she says. But still, do as she says, you worm-faced, crawling, sand-brained piece of lizard turd. Do it, I'll help her dismember you. Can't you see the worth of this woman?" The man at the bush straightened from his partial concealment, lowered his weapon. "He has obeyed," Stilgar said. "Now," Jessica said, "explain clearly to your people what it is you wish of me. I want no young hothead to make a foolish mistake. When we slip into the villages and towns, you must mask our origin, blend with the Pan and Grapen folk," Stilgar said. "We carry no weapons, for the Cry's knife is sacred. But you, woman, you have the weirding ability of battle. We'd only heard of it, and many doubted, but one cannot doubt what he sees with his own eyes. You mastered an armed Fremen. This is a weapon no search could expose." There was a stirring in the basin as Stilgar's words sank home. "And if I agree to teach you the weirding way, my countenance for you as well as your son." "How can we be sure of the truth in your promise?" Stilgar's voice lost some of its subtle undertone of reasoning, took on an edge of bitterness. "Out here, woman, we carry no paper for contracts. We make no evening promises to be broken at dawn. When a man says a thing, that's the contract. As leader of my people, I've put them in bond to my word. Teach us this weirding way, and you have sanctuary with us as long as you wish. Your water shall mingle with our water." "Can you speak for all Fremen?" Jessica asked. "In time that may be, but only my brother, Liet, speaks for all Fremen. Here I promise only secrecy. My people will not speak of you to any other Sietch. The Harkonnens have returned to Dune in force, and your Duke is dead. It is said that you two died in a mother storm. The hunter does not seek dead game. There's safety in that, Jessica thought, but these people have good communications, and a message could be sent. I presume there was a reward offered for us, she said. Stilgar remained silent, and she could almost see the thoughts turning over in his head, sensing the shifts of his muscles beneath her hands. Presently he said, I will say it once more. I've given the tribe's word bond. My people know your worth to us now. What could the Harkonnens give us? Our freedom? Ha! No, you are the Taqwa, that which buys us more than all the spice in the Harkonnen coffers. Then I shall teach you my way of battle, Jessica said, and she seemed sensed the unconscious ritual intensity of her own words. Now you will release me. So be it, Jessica said. She released her hold on him, stepped aside in full view of the band in the basin. This is a test, Mashad, she thought, but Paul must know about them, even if I die for his knowledge. In the waiting silence, Paul inched forward to get a better view of where his mother stood. As he moved, he heard heavy breathing, suddenly stilled, above him in the vertical crack of the rock, and sensed a faint shadow there outlined against the stars. Stilgar's voice came up from the basin. You, up there, stop hunting the boy. He will come down presently. The voice of a young boy or girl sounded from the darkness above Paul. But still, he can't be far from... I said, leave him be, Chani, you spawn of a lizard. There came a whispered imprecation from above Paul in a low voice. Call me spawn of a lizard. But the shadow pulled back out of view. Paul returned his attention to the basin, picking up the grey-shadowed movement of Stilgar beside his mother. Come in, all of you, Stilgar called. He turned to Jessica. And now I'll ask you how we may be certain you'll fulfill your half of our bargain. You're the ones lived with papers and empty contracts and such as... We of the Bene Gesserit don't break our vows any more than you do, Jessica said. There was a protracted silence, then a multiple hissing of voices. The Bene Gesserit witch! Paul brought his captured weapon from his sash, trained it on the dark figure of Stilgar, but the man and his companions remained immobile, staring at Jessica. It is the legend, someone said. It was said that the Shadow Mapes gave this report on you, Stilgar said, but a thing so important must be tested. If you are the Bene Gesserit of the legend whose son will lead us to paradise, he shrugged. Jessica sighed, thinking, so our missionaria protective are either planted religious safety valves all through this hellhole. Ah, well, it'll help, and that's what it was meant to do. She said, the seeress who brought you the legend, she gave it under the binding of Karama and Ajaz, the miracle and the inimitability of the prophecy. This I know. Do you wish to see a sign? His nostrils flared in the moonlight. We cannot tarry for the rites, he whispered. Jessica recalled a chart Kynes had shown her while arranging emergency escape routes. How long ago it seemed. There had been a place called Sietch Tabor on the chart, and beside it the notation, Stilgar. Perhaps when we get to Sietch Tabor, she said. The revelation shook him, and Jessica thought, if only he knew the tricks we use. She must have been good, that Bene Gesserit of the Missionaria Protectiva. These Fremen are beautifully prepared to believe in us. Stilgar shifted uneasily. We must go now. She nodded, letting him know that they left with her permission. He looked up at the cliff almost directly at the rock ledge where Paul crouched. You there, lad. You may come down now. He returned his attention to Jessica, spoke with an apologetic tone. Your son made an incredible amount of noise climbing. He has much to learn lest he endanger us all, but he's young. No doubt we have much to teach each other, Jessica said. Meanwhile, you'd best to see to your companion out there. My noisy son was a bit rough in disarming him. Stilgar whirled, his hood flapping. Where? Beyond those bushes, she pointed. Stilgar touched two of his men. See to it. He glanced at his companions, identifying them. Jamis is missing. He turned to Jessica. Even your cub knows the leading way. And you'll notice that my son hasn't stirred from up there as you ordered, Jessica said. The two men Stilgar had sent returned, supporting a third who stumbled and gasped between them. Stilgar gave them a flicking glance, returned his attention to Jessica. The son will take only your orders, eh? Good. He knows discipline. Paul, you may come down now, Jessica said. Paul stood up, emerging into moonlight above his concealing cleft, slipped the Fremen weapon back into his sash. As he turned, another figure rose from the rocks to face him. In the moonlight and a reflection of grey stone, Paul saw a small figure in Fremen robes, a shadowed face peering out at him from the hood, and the muzzle of one of the projectile weapons aimed at him from a folded robe. I am Chani, daughter of Liet. The voice was lilting, half filled with laughter. I would not have permitted you to harm my companions, she said. Paul swallowed. The figure in front of him turned into the moon's path, and he saw an elfin face, black pits of eyes. The familiarity of that face, the features out of numberless visions in his earliest prescience, shocked Paul to stillness. He remembered the angry bravado with which he had once described this face from a dream, telling the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mahayim, "I will meet her," and here was the face, but in no meeting he had ever dreamed. "You were as noisy as Shai Halud in a rage," she said, "and you took the most difficult way up here. Follow me. I'll show you an easier way down." He scrambled out of the cleft, followed the swirling of her robe across a tumbled landscape. She moved like a gazelle, dancing over the rocks. Paul felt hot blood in his face, was thankful for the darkness. That girl, she was like a touch of destiny. He felt caught up on a wave, in tune with emotion that lifted all his spirits. They stood presently amid the Fremen on the basin floor. Jessica turned a wry smile on Paul, but spoke to Stilgar. "This would be a good exchange of teachings. I hope you and your people feel no anger at our violence. It seemed necessary. You were about to make a mistake." "To save one from a mistake is a gift of paradise," Stilgar said. He touched his lips with his left hand, lifted the weapon from Paul's waist with the other, tossed it to a companion. "You will have your own Marla pistol, lad, when you've earned it." Paul started to speak, hesitated, remembering his mother's teaching. Beginnings are such delicate times. "My son has what weapons he needs," Jessica said. She stared at Stilgar, forcing him to think of how Paul had acquired the pistol. Stilgar glanced at the man Paul had subdued, Jamis. The man stood at one side, head lowered, breathing heavily. "You are a difficult woman," Stilgar said. He held out his left hand to a companion, snapped his fingers. "Kushti baka te." "More Chekhov, sir," Jessica thought. The companion pressed 2 squares of gauze into Stilgar's hand. Stilgar ran them through his fingers, fixed one around Jessica's neck beneath her hood, fitted the other around Paul's neck in the same way. "Now you wear the kerchief of the Baka," he said. "If we become separated, you will be recognized as belonging to Stilgar Sietch. We will talk of weapons another time." He moved out through his band now, inspecting them, giving Paul's Fremkit pack to one of his men to carry. Baka, Jessica thought, recognizing the religious term. Baka, the weeper. She sensed how the symbolism of the kerchiefs united this band. Why should weeping unite them, she asked herself. Stilgar came to the young girl who had embarrassed Paul, said, "Chani, take the child man under your wing. Keep him out of trouble." Chani touched Paul's arm. "Come along, child man." Paul hid the anger in his voice, said, "My name is Paul. It were, well, we'll give you a name, manling," Stilgar said. "In the time of the Mina, at the test of Akal, the test of reason," Jessica translated. The sudden need of Paul's ascendancy overrode all other consideration, and she barked, "My son's been tested with the Gom Jabbar." In the stillness that followed, she knew she had struck to the heart of them. "There's much we don't know of each other," Stilgar said, "but we tarry over long. Dason mustn't find us out in the open." He crossed to the man Paul had struck down and said, "Jamis, can you travel?" A grunt answered him. "Surprised me, he did. 'Twas an accident." "I can travel." "No accident," Stilgar said. "I'll hold you responsible with Chani for the lad's safety, Jamis. These people have my countenance." Jessica stared at the man Jamis. He was the voice that had argued with Stilgar from the rocks. He was the voice with death in it. His was the voice of death in it, and Stilgar had seen fit to reinforce his order with this Jamis. Stilgar flicked a testing glance across the group, motioned 2 men out. "Laris and Farouk, you are to hide our tracks. See that we leave no trace. Extra care. We have 2 of us who've not been trained." He turned, hand upheld, and aimed across the basin. "In squad line of flankers, move out. We must be at Cave of the Ridge just before dawn." Jessica fell into step beside Stilgar, counting heads. There were 40 Fremen. She and Paul made it 42. And she thought, they travel as a military company. Even the girl, Chani. Paul took a place in the line behind Chani. He had put down the black feeling of being caught by a girl. In his mind now was the memory called up by his mother's barked reminder. "My son's been tested with the Gom Jabbar." He found that his hand tingled with remembered pain. "Watch where you go," Chani hissed. "Do not brush against a bush lest you leave a thread to show our passage." Paul swallowed, nodded. Jessica listened to the sounds of the troop, hearing her own footsteps and Paul's, marvelling at the way the Fremen moved. There were 40 people crossing the basin with only the sounds natural to the place. Ghostly feluccas, their robes flitting through the shadows. Their destination was Sietch Tabor, Stilgar's Sietch. She turned the word over in her mind. Sietch. It was the Chekhov's word, unchanged from the old hunting language of countless centuries. Sietch, a meeting place in time of danger. The profound implications of the word and the language were just beginning to register with her after the tension of their encounter. "We move well," Stilgar said. "With Shai Hulud's favour, we'll reach Cave of the Ridges before dawn." Jessica nodded, conserving her strength, sensing the terrible fatigue she held at bay by force of will, and, she admitted it, by the force of elation. Her mind focused on the value of this troop, seeing what was revealed here about the Fremen culture. All of them, she thought, an entire culture trained to military order. What a priceless thing is here for an outcast duke. The Fremen were supreme in that quality the ancients called Spannungsbogen, which is the self-imposed delay between desire for a thing and the act of reaching out to grasp that thing. From the wisdom of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. They approached Cave of the Ridges at dawnbreak, moving through a split in the basin wall so narrow they had to turn sideways to negotiate it. Jessica saw Stilgar detach guards in the thin dawnlight, saw them for a moment as they began their scrambling climb up the cliff. Paul turned his head upward as he walked, seeing the tapestry of this planet cut in cross-section where the narrow cleft gave toward grey-blue sky. Charlie pulled at his rope to hurry him, said, "Quickly, it is already light." "The men who climbed above us, where are they going?" Paul whispered. "The first day watch," she said. "Hurry now." A guard left outside, Paul thought. Wise. But it would have been wiser still for us to approach this place in separate bands. Less chance of losing the whole troop. He paused in the thought, realizing that this was guerrilla thinking, and he remembered his father's fear that the Atreides might become a guerrilla house. "Faster," Chani whispered. Paul sped his steps, hearing the swish of ropes behind, and he thought of the words of the Sirat from Yue's tiny OC Bible. "Paradise on my right, hell on my left, and the angel of death behind." He rolled the quotation in his mind. They rounded a corner where the passage widened. Stilgar stood at one side, motioning them into a low hole that opened at right angles. "Quickly," he hissed. "We're like rabbits in a cage if a patrol catches us here." Paul bent for the opening, followed Chani into a cave illuminated by a thin grey light from somewhere ahead. "You can stand up," she said. He straightened, studied the place, a deep and wide area with domed ceiling that curved away just out of a man's hand reach. The troop spread out through shadows. Paul saw his mother come up on one side, saw her examine their companions, and he noted how she failed to blend with the Fremen even though her garb was identical. The way she moved, such a sense of power and grace. "Find a place to rest and stay out of the way, child man," Chani said. "Here's food." She pressed 2 leaf-wrapped morsels into his hand. They reeked of spice. Stilgar came up behind Jessica, called an order to a group on the left. "Get the door seal in place and set either to moisture security." He turned to another Fremen. "Lemme will get glow globes." He took Jessica's arm. "I wish to show you something, weirding woman." He led her around a curve of rock toward the light source. Jessica found herself looking out across the wide lip of another opening to the cave, an opening high in a cliff wall, looking out across another basin about 10 or 12 kilometers wide. The basin was shielded by high rock walls. Sparse clumps of plant growth were scattered around it. As she looked at the dawn-grey basin, the sun lifted over the far escarpment, illuminating a biscuit-coloured landscape of rocks and sand, and she noted how the sun of Arrakis appeared to leap over the horizon. "It's because we want to hold it back," she thought. "Night is safer than day." There came over her then a longing for a rainbow in this place that would never see rain. "I must suppress such longings," she thought. "They are a weakness. I no longer can afford weaknesses." Stilgar gripped her arm, pointed across the basin. There you see Papa Druz's." She looked where he pointed, saw movement, people on the basin floor scattering at the daylight into the shadows of the opposite cliff wall. In spite of the distance, their movements were plain in the clear air. She lifted her binoculars from beneath her robe, focused the oil lenses on the distant people. Kerchiefs fluttered like a flight of multicolored butterflies. "That is home," Stilgar said. "We will be there this night." He stared across the basin, tugging at his mustache. "My people stayed out overlate working. That means there are no patrols about. I'll signal them later and they'll prepare for us." "Your people show good discipline," Jessica said. She lowered the binoculars so that Stilgar was looking at them. "They observe the preservation of the tribe," he said. "It is the way we choose among us for a leader. The leader is the one who is the strongest, the one who brings order and security." He lifted his attention to her face. She returned his stare, noted the whiteless eyes, the stained eye pits, the dust-rimmed beard and mustache, the line of the catch tube carving down from his nostrils into his still suit. "Have I compromised your leadership by besting you, Stilgar?" she asked. "You did not call me out," he said. "It's important that a leader keep the respect of his troop," she said. "Isn't I one of those sand lice I cannot handle?" Stilgar said. "When you bested me, you bested us all. Now they hope to learn from you, the weirding way, and some are curious to see if you intend to call me out." She weighed the implications. "By besting you in formal battle?" He nodded. "I'd advise you against this because they'd not follow you. You're not of the sand. They saw this in our night's passage." "Practical people," she said. "True enough." He glanced at the basin. "We know our needs, but not many are thinking deep thoughts now this close to home. We've been out overlong arranging to deliver our spice quota to the free traders for the Cursed Guild. May their faces be forever black." Jessica stopped in the act of turning away from him, looked back up into his face. The guild? What has the guild to do with your spice? It's Liet's command, Stilgar said. We know the reason, but the taste of it sours us. We bribe the guild with a monstrous payment in spice to keep our skies clear of satellites and such, that none may spy what we do to the face of Arrakis. She weighed out her words, remembering that Paul had said this must be the reason our king's skies were clear of satellites. What is it you do to the face of Arrakis that must not be seen? We change it, slowly but with certainty, to make it fit for human life. Our generation will not see it, nor our children, nor our children's children, nor the grandchildren of their children. But it will come. He stared with veiled eyes out over the basin. Open water and tall green plants and people walking freely without still suits. Svasta dreamed of this Liet kinds, she thought, and she said, bribes are dangerous. They have a way of growing larger and larger. They grow, he said, but the slow way is the safe way. Jessica turned, looked out over the basin, trying to see it the way Stilgar was seeing it in his imagination. She saw only the greyed mustard stain of distant rocks and a sudden hazy motion in the sky above the cliffs. Ah, Stilgar said. She thought at first it must be a patrol vehicle, then realized it was a mirage, another landscape hovering over the desert sand and a distant wavering of greenery, and in the middle distance a long worm, travelling the surface of what looked like Fremen robes fluttering on its back. The mirage faded. It would be better to ride, Stilgar said, but we cannot permit a maker into this basin. Thus we must walk again tonight. Maker, their word for worm, she thought. She measured the import of his words, the statement that they could not permit a worm into this basin. She knew what she had seen in the mirage, Fremen riding on the back of a giant worm. It took heavy control not to betray her shock at the implications. We must be getting back to the others, Stilgar said, else my people may suspect I dally with you. Some already are jealous that my hands tasted your loveliness when we struggled last night in Tuono Basin. That will be enough of that, Jessica snapped. No offence, Stilgar said, and his voice was mild. Women among us are not taken against their will. And with you, he shrugged. Even that convention isn't required. You will keep in mind that I was a duke's lady, she said, but her voice was calmer. As you wish, he said. It's time to seal off this opening, to permit relaxation of stillsuit discipline. My people need to rest in comfort this day. Their families will give them little rest on the morrow. Silence fell between them. Jessica stared out into the sunlight. She had heard what she had heard in Stilgar's voice, the unspoken offer of more than his countenance. Did he need a wife? She realized she could step into that place with him. It would be one way to end conflict over tribal leadership, female properly aligned with male. But what of Paul then? Who could tell yet what rules of parenthood prevailed here? What of the unborn daughter she had carried these few weeks? What of a dead duke's daughter? And she permitted herself to face fully the significance of this other child growing within her, to see her own motives in permitting the conception. She knew what it was. She had succumbed to that profound drive shared by all creatures who were faced with death, the drive to seek immortality through progeny. The fertility drive of the species had overpowered them. Jessica glanced at Stilgar, saw that he was studying her, waiting. A daughter born to a woman wed to such a one as this man. What would be the fate of such a daughter? She asked herself. Would he try to limit the necessities that a Bene Gesserit must follow? Stilgar cleared his throat and revealed then that he understood some of the questions in her mind. What is important for a leader is that which makes him a leader. It is the needs of his people. If you teach me your powers, there may come a day when one of us must challenge the other. I would prefer some alternative. There are several alternatives, she asked. The Sayadina, he said. Our Reverend Mother is old. Their Reverend Mother. Before she could probe this, he said, I do not necessarily offer myself as mate. This is nothing personal, for you are beautiful and desirable, but should you become one of my women, that might lead some of my young men to believe that I'm too much concerned with pleasures of the flesh and not enough concerned with the tribe's needs. Even now they listen to us and watch us. A man who weighs his decisions, who thinks of consequences, she thought. There are those among my young men who have reached the age of wild spirits, he said. They must be eased through this period. I must leave no great reasons around for them to challenge me, because I would have to maim and kill among them. This is not the proper course for a leader, if it can be avoided with honour. A leader, you see, is one of the things that distinguishes a mob from a people. He maintains the level of individuals. Too few individuals, and a people reverts to a mob. His words, the depth of their awareness, the fact that he spoke as much to her as to those who secretly listened, forced her to re-evaluate him. He has stature, she thought. Where did he learn such inner balance? The law that demands one form of choosing a leader is a just law, Stilgar said, but it does not follow that justice is always the thing a people needs. What we truly need now is time to grow and prosper, to spread our force over more land. What is his ancestry, she wondered.
Whence comes such breeding? She said. Stilgar, I underestimated you. Such was my suspicion, he said. Each of us apparently underestimated the other, she said. I should like an end to this, he said. I should like friendship with you, and trust. I should like that respect for each other which grows in the breast of our demand for the huddlings of sex. I understand, she said. Do you trust me? I hear your sincerity. Among us, he said, the Sayadina, when they are not the formal leaders, hold a special place of honor. They teach, they maintain the strength of God here. He touched his breast. Now I must probe this Reverend Mother mystery, she thought. And she said, You spoke of your Reverend Mother, and I've heard words of legend and prophecy. It is said that a Bene Gesserit and her offspring hold the key to our future, he said. Do you believe I am that one? She watched his face, thinking, The young reed die so easily, beginnings at times of such great peril. We do not know, he said. She nodded, thinking, He's an honourable man. He wants a sign from me, but he'll not tip fate by telling me the sign. Jessica turned her head, stared down into the basin of the golden shadows, the purple shadows, the vibrations of dust-smote air across the lip of their cave. Her mind was filled suddenly with feline prudence. She knew the cant of the Missionaria Protectiva, knew how to adapt the techniques of legend and fear and hope to her emergency needs, but she sensed wild changes here, as though someone had been in among these Fremen and capitalized on the Missionaria Protectiva's imprint. Stilgar cleared his throat. She sensed his impatience, knew that the day moved ahead and men waited to seal off this opening. This was a time for boldness on her part, and she realized what she needed. Some Dar al-Hikman, some school of translation that would give her adab, she whispered. Her mind felt as though it had rolled over within her. She recognized the sensation of quickening of pulse. Nothing in all the Bene Gesserit training carried such a signal of recognition. It could be only the adab, the demanding memory that comes upon you of itself. She gave herself up to it, allowing the words to flow from her. Ibn Kirtaiba, she said, as far as the spot where the dust ends. She stretched out an arm from her robe, seeing Stilgar's eyes go wide. She heard a rustling of many ropes in the background. I see a Fremen of the Book of Examples, she intoned. He reads to Alat, the son whom he defied and subjugated. He reads to the Sadhus of the trial, and this is what he reads. Mine enemies are like green blades eaten down, that did stand in the path of the tempest. Hast thou not seen what our Lord did? He sent the pestilence among them, that did lay schemes against us. They are like birds scattered by the huntsman. Their schemes are like pellets of poison, that every mouth rejects. A trembling passed through her. She dropped her arm. Back to her from the inner cave's shadows came a whispered response of many voices. Their works have been overturned. The fire of God mount over thy heart, she said, and she thought, now it goes in the proper channel. The fire of God set alight, came the response. She nodded. Thine enemies shall fall, she said. Be'ai lal kaifa, they answered. In the sudden hush, Stilgar bowed to her. Sayadina, he said. If the shy Hulud grant, then you may yet pass within to become a reverend mother. Pass within, she thought, an odd way of putting it, but the rest of it fitted into the cant well enough, and she felt a cynical bitterness at what she had done. Our missionaria protectiva seldom fails. A place was prepared for us in this wilderness. The prayer of the Salat has carved out our hiding place. Now must play the part of Aulia, the friend of God. Sayadina to rogue peoples who've been so heavily imprinted with our Bene Gesserit soothsay, they even call their chief priestesses reverend mothers. Paul stood beside Chani in the shadows of the inner cave. He could still taste the morsel she had fed him, bird flesh and grain bound with spice honey and encased in a leaf. In tasting it he had realized he never before had eaten such a concentration of spice essence. There had been a moment of fear. He knew what this essence could do to him, the spice change that pushed his mind into prescient awareness. Bai Lal Kaifa, Chani whispered. He looked at her, seeing the awe with which the Fremen appeared to accept his mother's words. Only the man called Jamis seemed to stand aloof from the ceremony, holding himself apart with arms folded across his breast. Doi Yaka Him Manj, Chani whispered. Doi Punra Hin Manj. I have 2 eyes, I have 2 feet. And she stared at Paul with a look of wonder. Paul took a deep breath, trying to still the tempest within him. His mother's words had locked onto the working of the spice essence, and he had felt her voice rise and fall within him like the shadows of an open fire. Through it all, he had sensed the edge of cynicism in her. He knew her so well, but nothing could stop this thing that had begun with a morsel of food. Terrible purpose. He sensed it, the race consciousness that he could not escape. There was the sharpened clarity, the inflow of data, the cold precision of his awareness. He sank to the floor, sitting with his back against rock, giving himself up to it. Awareness flowed into that timeless stratum where he could view time, sensing the available paths, the winds of the future, the winds of the past. the one-eyed vision of the future, all combined in a trinocular vision that permitted him to see time become space. There was danger, he felt, of overrunning himself, and he had to hold on to his awareness of the present, sensing the blurred deflection of experience, the flowing moment, the continual solidification of that which is into the perpetual was. In grasping the present, he felt for the first time the massive steadiness of time's movement, everywhere complicated by shifting currents, waves, surges, and counter-surges, like surf against rocky cliffs. It gave him a new understanding of his prescience, and he saw the source of blind time, the source of error in it, with an immediate sensation of fear. The prescience, he realized, was an illumination that incorporated the limits of what it revealed, at once a source of accuracy and meaningful error. A kind of Heisenberg indeterminacy intervened. The expenditure of energy that revealed what he saw changed what he saw. And what he saw was a time nexus within this cave, a boiling of possibilities focused here, where in the most minute action, the wink of an eye, a careless word, a misplaced grain of sand, moved a gigantic lever across the known universe. He saw violence with the outcome subject to so many variables that his slightest movement created vast shiftings in the pattern. The vision made him want to freeze into immobility, but this too was action with its consequences. The countless consequences, lines fanned out from this cave, and along most of these consequence lines he saw his own dead body, with blood flowing from a gaping knife wound. My father, the Padishah Emperor, was 72, yet looked no more than 35 the year he encompassed the death of Duke Leto and gave Arrakis back to the Harkonnens. He seldom appeared in public wearing other than a Sardaukar uniform and a Berserk's black helmet with the Imperial line in gold upon its crest. The uniform was an open reminder of where his powers lay. He was not always that blatant, though. When he wanted, he could radiate charm and sincerity, but I often wonder in these later days if anything about him was as it seemed. I think now he was a man fighting constantly to escape the bars of an invisible cage. You must remember that he was an emperor, fatherhead of a dynasty that reached back into the dimmest history, but we denied him a legal son. Was this not the most terrible defeat a ruler ever suffered? My mother obeyed her sister superiors, whether the Lady Jessica disobeyed. Which of them was the stronger? History already has answered. In my father's house, by the Princess Irulan. Jessica awakened in cave darkness, sensing the stir of Fremen around her, smelling the acrid stillsuit odor. Her inner time sense told her it would soon be night outside, but the cave remained in blackness, shielded from the desert by the plastic hoods that trapped their body moisture within this space. She realized that she had permitted herself the utterly relaxing sleep of great fatigue, and this suggested something of her own unconscious assessment on personal security within Stilgar's troop. She turned in the hammock that had been fashioned on of her robe, slipped her feet to the rock floor and into her desert boots. I must remember to fasten the boots slip fashion to help my stillsuit's pumping action, she thought. There are so many things to remember. She could still taste their morning meal, the morsel of bird flesh and grain bound within a leaf with spice honey, and it came to her that the use of time was turned around here. Night was a day of activity, and day was the time of rest. Night conceals, night is safest. She unhooked her robe from its hammock pegs in a rock alcove, fumbled with the fabric in the dark until she found the top, slipped into it. How to get a message out to the Bene Gesserit, she wondered. That would have to be told of the two strays in Arrakeen Sanctuary. Glow globes came alight farther into the cave. She saw people moving there, Paul among them already dressed and with his hood thrown back to reveal the aquiline Atreides profile. He had acted so strangely before they retired, she thought, withdrawn. He was like one come back from the dead, not yet fully aware of his return, his eyes half shut and glassy with the inward stare. It made her think of his warning about the spice-impregnated diet. Addictive. Are there side effects? She wondered. He said it had something to do with his prescient faculty, but he has been strangely silent about what he sees. Stilgar came from shadows to her right, crossed to the group beneath the glow globes. She marked how he fingered his beard about the watchful, cat-stalking look of him. Abrupt fear shot through Jessica, and as her senses awakened to the tensions visible in the people gathered around Paul, the stiff movements, the ritual positions. They have my countenance, Stilgar rumbled. Jessica recognized the man Stilgar confronted, Jamis. She saw then the rage in Jamis, the tight set of his shoulders. Jamis, the man Paul bested, she thought. You know the rules, Stilgar, Jamis said. Who knows it better? Stilgar asked, and she heard the tone of placation in his voice, the attempt to smooth something over. I choose the combat, Jamis growled. Jessica sped across the cave, grasped Stilgar's arm. What is this? She asked. It is the Amtal rule, Stilgar said. Jamis is demanding the right to test your part in the legend. She must be championed, Jamis said. If her champion wins, that's the truth in it. But it said, he glanced across the press of people, that she'd need no champion from the Fremen, which can mean only that she brings her own champion. He's talking of single combat with Paul, Jessica thought. She released Stilgar's arm, took a half step forward. I'm always my own champion, she said. The meaning's simple enough for... You'll not tell us our ways, Janis snapped. Not without more proof than I've seen. Stilgar could have told you what to say last morning. He could have filled your mind full of the coddle, and you could have bird-talked it to us, hoping to make a false way among us. I can take him, Jessica thought, but that might conflict with the way they interpret the legend. And again she wondered at the way the mission area protective's work had been twisted on this planet. Stilgar looked at Jessica, spoke in a low voice, but one designed to carry to the crowd's fringe. Jamis is one to hold a grudge, Sayadina. Your son bested him, and it was an accident, Jamis roared. There was witch force at Tuono Basin, and I'll prove it now. And I've bested him myself, Stilgar continued. He seeks by this Tahadi challenge to get back at me as well. There's too much of violence in Jamis for him ever to make a good leader, too much gafla for distraction. He gives his mouth to the rules and his heart to the Safa, the turning away. No, he could never make a good leader. I've preserved him this long because he's useful in a fight as such, but when he gets this carving anger on him, he's dangerous to his own society. Stilgar, Jamis rumbled. And Jessica saw what Stilgar was doing, trying to enrage Jamis, to take the challenge away from Paul. Stilgar faced Jamis, and again Jessica heard the soothing in the rumbling voice. Jamis, he's but a boy. You named him a man, Jamis said. His mother says he's been through the Gomjabar. He's full-fleshed and with a surfeit of water. The ones who carried their pack say there's liter-johns of water in it, liter-johns, and us sipping our catch pockets the instant they show dew sparkle. Stilgar glanced at Jessica. Is this true? Is there water in your pack? Yes. Liter-johns of it? 2 liter-johns. What was intended with this wealth? Wealth? She thought. She shook her head, feeling the coldness in his voice. But I was born, water fell from the sky and ran over the land in wide rivers, she said. There were oceans of it so broad you could not see the other shore. I've not been trained to your water discipline. I never before had to think of it this way. A sighing gasp arose from the people around them. Water fell from the sky. It ran over the land. Do you know there are those among us who've lost from their catch pockets by accident and will be in sore trouble before we reach Tabo this night? How could I know? Jessica shook her head. If they're in need, give them water from our pack. Is that what you intended with this wealth? I intended it to save life, she said. Then we accept your blessing, Sayadina. You'll not buy us off with water, Jamis growled. Nor will you anger me against yourself, Stilgar. I see you trying to make me call you out before I've proved my words. Stilgar faced Jamis. Are you determined to press this fight against a child, Jamis? His voice was low, venomous. She must be championed. Even though she has my countenance, I invoke the Amtal rule, Jamis said. It is my right. Stilgar nodded. Then, if the boy does not carve you down, you'll answer to my knife afterward, and this time I'll not hold back the blade as I've done before. You cannot do this thing, Jessica said. Paul's jest. You must not interfere, Sayadina, Stilgar said. Oh, I know you can take me, and therefore can take anyone among us, but you cannot best us all united. This must be. It is the Amtal rule. Jessica fell silent, staring at him in the green light of the glow globes, seeing the demoniacal stiffness that had taken over his expression. She shifted her attention to Jamis, saw the brooding look to his brows, and thought, I should have seen that before. He broods. He's the silent kind, one who works himself up inside. I should have been prepared. If you harm my son, she said, you'll have to meet a meet. I call you out now. I'll carve you into a joint of... Mother! Paul stepped forward, touched her sleeve. Perhaps if I explain to Jamis how... Explain! Jamis sneered. Paul fell silent, staring at the man. He felt no fear of him. Jamis appeared clumsy in his movements, and he had fallen so easily in their night encounter on the sand. But Paul still felt the nexus boiling of this cave, still remembered the prescient visions of himself dead under a knife. There had been so few avenues of escape for him in that vision. Stilgar said, Sayadina, you must step back now. Where? Stop calling her Sayadina, Jamis said. That's yet to be proved. So she knows the prayer. What's that? Every child among us knows it. He has talked enough, Jessica thought. I have the key to him. I could immobilize him with a word. She hesitated, but I cannot stop them all. You will answer to me then, Jessica said, and she pitched her voice in a twisting tone with a little whine in it and a catch at the end. Jamis stared at her, fright visible on his face. I'll teach you agony, she said in the same tone. Remember that as you fight. You'll have agony such as you will make the Gom Jabbar a happy memory by comparison. You will writhe with your entire... She tries a spell on me, Jamis gasped. He put his clenched right fist beside his ear. I invoked the silence on her. So be it then, Stilgar said. He cast a warning glance at Jessica. If you speak again, Sayadina, we'll know it's your witchcraft and you'll be forfeit. He nodded for her to step back. Jessica felt hands pulling her, helping her back, and she sensed they were not unkindly. She saw Paul being separated from the throng, the elfin-faced Chani whispering in his ear as she nodded toward Jamis. A ring formed within the troop, more glow globes abroad, and all of them tuned to the yellow band. Jamis stepped into the ring, slipped out of his robe, and tossed it to someone in the crowd. He stood there in a cloudy grey slickness of steel suit that was patched and marked by tucks and gathers. For a moment he bent with his mouth to his shoulder, drinking from a catch pocket tube. Presently he straightened, peeled off and detached the suit, handed it carefully into the crowd. He stood waiting, clad in loincloth and some tight fabric over his feet, a cries knife in his right hand. Jessica saw the girl child Chani helping Paul, saw her press a cries knife handle into his palm, saw him heft it, testing the weight and balance, and it came to Jessica that Paul had been trained in prana and bindu, the nerve and the fibre, that he had been taught fighting in a deadly school, his teachers men like Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck, men who were legends in their own lifetimes. The boy knew the devious ways of the Bene Gesserit, and he looked supple and confident. But he's only 15, she thought, and he has no shield. I must stop this. Somehow there must be a way to... She looked up, saw Stilgar watching her. You cannot stop it, he said. You must not speak. She put a hand over her mouth, thinking, I've planted fear in Jamis' mind. It'll slow him some, perhaps, if I could only pray, truly pray. Paul stood alone now just into the ring, clad in the fighting trunks he'd worn under his still suit. He held a cries knife in his right hand. His feet were bare against the sand-gritted rock. Idaho had warned him time and again, when in doubt of your surface, bare feet are best. And there were Chinese words of instruction still in the front of his consciousness. Jamis turns to the right of his knife after a parry. It's a habit we've all seen. And he'll aim for the eyes to catch a blink in which to slash you, and you can fight either hand. Look out for a knife shift. But the strongest in Paul, so that he felt it with his entire body, was the training and the instinctual reaction mechanism that had been hammered into him day after day, hour after hour, on the practice floor. Gurney Halleck's words were there to remember. The good knife fighter thinks on point and blade and shearing guard simultaneously. The point can also cut, the blade can also stab. The shearing guard can also trap your opponent's blade. Paul glanced at the cries knife. There was no shearing guard, only the slim round ring of the handle with its raised lips to protect the hand. And even so, he realized that he did not know the breaking tension of this blade, did not even know if it could be broken. Jamis began sidling to the right along the edge of the ring opposite Paul. Paul crouched, realizing then that he had no shield, but was trained to fighting with its subtle field around him, trained to react on defense with utmost speed while his attack would be timed to the controlled slowness necessary for penetrating the enemy's shield. In spite of constant warning from his trainers not to depend on the shield's mindless blunting of attack speed, he knew that shield awareness was part of him. Jamis called out in ritual challenge, May thy knife chip and shatter. This knife will break then, Paul thought. He cautioned himself that Jamis also was without shield, but the man wasn't trained to its use, had no shield fighter inhibitions. Paul stared across the ring at Jamis. The man's body looked like knotted whipcord on a dried skeleton. His cries knife shone milky yellow in the light of the glow globes. Fear coursed through Paul. He felt suddenly alone and naked, standing in dull yellow light within this ring of people. Prescience had fed his knowledge of countless experiences, hinted at the strongest currents of the future and the strings of decision that guided them, but this was the real now. This was death hanging on an infinite number of minuscule mischances. Anything could tip the future here, he realized. Someone coughing in the troop of watchers, a distraction, a variation in a glow globe's brilliance, a deceptive shadow. I'm afraid, Paul told himself, and he circled warily opposite Jamis, repeating to himself the Bene Gesserit litany against fear. Fear is the mind killer. It was a cool bath washing over him. He felt muscles unite themselves, become poised and ready. I'll sheath my knife in your blood, Jamis snarled, and in the middle of the last word he pounced. Jessica saw the motion, stifled an outcry. When the man struck, there was only empty air, and Paul stood now behind Jamis with a clear shot at the exposed back. Now, Paul, now! Jessica screamed it in her mind. Paul's motion was slowly timed, beautifully fluid, but so slow it gave Jamis the margin to twist away, backing and turning to the right. Paul withdrew, crouching low. First you must find my blood, he said. Jessica recognized the shield fighter timing in her son, and came over her what a two-edged thing that was. The boy's reactions were those of youth and trained to a peak these people had never seen, but the attack was trained too, and conditioned by the necessities of penetrating a shield barrier. A shield would repel too fast to blow, admit only the slowly deceptive counter. It needed control and trickery to get through a shield. Does Paul see it? She asked herself. He must. Again Jamis attacked, ink-dark eyes glaring, his body a yellow blur under the glow globes, and again Paul slipped away to return too slowly on the attack, and again and again.
Each time Paul's counterblow came an instant late, and Jessica saw a thing she hoped Jamis did not see. Paul's defensive reactions were blindingly fast, but they moved each time at the precisely correct angle they would take if a shield were helping deflect part of Jamis' blow. Is your son playing with that poor fool? Stilgar asked. He waved her to silence before she could respond. Sorry, you must remain silent. Now the two figures on the rock floor circled each other, Jamis if knife hand held far forward and tipped up slightly, Paul crouched if knife held low. Again Jamis pounced, and this time he twisted to the right where Paul had been dodging. Instead of faking backing out, Paul met the man's knife hand on the point of his own blade. Then the boy was gone, twisting away to the left and thankful for Chani's warning. Jamis backed into the center of the circle, rubbing his knife hand. Blood dripped from the injury for a moment, stopped. His eyes were wide and staring, two blue black holes, studying Paul with a new wariness in the dull light of the glow globes. Ah, that one hurt, Stilgar murmured. Paul crouched at the ready and, as he had been trained to do after first blood, called out, Do you yield? Ha! Jamis cried. An angry murmur arose from the troop. Hold, Stilgar called out. The lad doesn't know our rule. Then to Paul, there can be no yielding in the Tahadi challenge. Death is the test of it. Jessica saw Paul swallow hard, and she thought, he's never killed a man like this, in the hot blood of a knife fight. Can he do it? Paul circled slowly right, forced by Jamis' movement. The prescient knowledge of the time-boiling variables in this cave came back to plague him now. His new understanding told him there were too many swiftly compressed decisions in this fight for any clear channel ahead to show itself. Variable piled on variable, this was why this cave lay as a blurred nexus in his path. It was like a gigantic rock in the flood, creating maelstroms in the current around it. Have an end to it, lad, Stilgar muttered. Don't play with him. Paul crept farther into the ring, relying on his own edge in speed. Jamis backed now that the realization swept over him. But this was no soft off-worlder in the Tahadi ring, easy prey for a Fremen Kry's knife. Jessica saw the shadow of desperation in the man's face. Now is when he's most dangerous, she thought. Now he's desperate and can do anything. He sees that this is not like a child of his own people, but a fighting machine born and trained to it from infancy. Now the fear I planted in him has come to bloom, and she found in herself a sense of pity for Jamis, an emotion tempered by awareness of the immediate peril to her son. Jamis could do anything, any unpredictable thing, she told herself. She wondered then if Paul had glimpsed his future, if he were reliving this experience. But she saw the way her son moved, the beads of perspiration on his face and shoulders, the careful wariness visible in the flow of muscles. For the first time she sensed, without understanding it, the uncertainty factor in Paul's gift. Paul pressed for fight now, circling but not attacking. He had seen the fear in his opponent. Memory of Duncan Idaho's voice flowed through Paul's awareness. When your opponent fears you, then's the moment when you give the fear its own reign. Give it the time to work on him. Let it become terror. The terrified man fights himself. Eventually he attacks in desperation. That is the most dangerous moment, but the terrified man can be trusted usually to make a fatal mistake. You are being trained how to detect these mistakes and use them. The crowd in the cavern began to mutter. They think Paul's toying with Jamis, Jessica thought. They think Paul's being needlessly cruel. But she sensed also the undercurrent of crowd excitement, their enjoyment of the spectacle, and she could see the pressure building up in Jamis. The moment when it became too much for him to contain was as apparent to her as it was to Jamis, or to Paul. Jamis leaped high, feinting and striking down with his right hand, but the hand was empty. The Kry's knife had been shifted to his left hand. Jessica gasped, but Paul had been warned by Chani. Jamis fights with either hand, and the depth of his training had taken in that trick en passant. Keep the mind on the knife and not on the hand that holds it, Gurney Hallecker told him time and again. The knife is more dangerous than the hand, and the knife can be in either hand. And Paul had seen Jamis' mistake. Bad footwork so that it took the man a heartbeat longer to recover from his leap, which had been intended to confuse Paul and hide the knife shift. Except for the low yellow light of the glow globes and the inky eyes of the staring troop, it was similar to a session on the practice floor. Shields didn't count where the body's own movement could be used against it. Paul shifted his own knife in a blurred motion, slipped sideways and thrust upward where Jamis' chest was descending, then away to watch the man crumple. Jamis fell like a limp rag, face down, gasped once and turned his face toward Paul, then lay still on the rock floor. His dead eyes stared out like beads of dark glass. Killing with the point lacks artistry, Idaho had once told Paul, but don't let that hold your hand when the opening presents itself. The troop rushed forward, filling the ring, pushing Paul aside. They hid Jamis in a frenzy of huddling activity. Presently a group of them hurried back into the depths of the cavern, carrying a burden wrapped in a robe. And there was no body on the rock floor. Jessica pressed toward her son. She felt that she swam in a sea of robed and stinking backs, a throng strangely silent. Now is the terrible moment, she thought. He has killed a man in clear superiority of mind and muscle. must not grow to enjoy such a victory. She forced herself through the last of the troop and into a small open space where two bearded Fremen were helping Paul into his still suit. Jessica stared at her son. Paul's eyes were bright. He breathed heavily, permitting the ministrations to his body rather than helping them. Him against Jamis and not a mark on him, one of the men muttered. Chani stood at one side, her eyes focused on Paul. Jessica saw the girl's excitement, the admiration in the elfin face. It must be done now and swiftly, Jessica thought. She compressed ultimate scorn into her voice and manner, said, "Well, now, how does it feel to be a killer?" Paul stiffened as though he had been struck. He made his mother's cold glare and his face darkened with a rush of blood. Involuntarily he glanced toward the place on the cavern floor where Jamis had lain. Stilgar pressed through to Jessica's side, returning from the cave depths where the body of Jamis had been taken. He spoke to Paul in a bitter, controlled tone. "When the time comes for you to call me out and try for my murder, do not think you will play with me the way you played with Jamis." Jessica sensed the way her own words and Stilgar's sank into Paul, doing their harsh work on the boy. The mistake these people made, it served a purpose now. She searched for faces around them as Paul was doing, seeing what he saw. Admiration, yes, and fear, and in some, loathing. She looked at Stilgar, saw his fatalism, knew how the fight had seemed to him. Paul looked at his mother. "You know what it was," he said. She heard the return to sanity, the remorse in his voice. Jessica swept her glance across the troop, said, "Paul has never killed a man with a naked blade." Stilgar faced her, disbelief in his face. "I wasn't playing with him," Paul said. He pressed in front of his mother, straightening his robe, glanced at the dark place of Jamis blood on the cavern floor. "I did not want to kill him." Jessica saw belief come slowly to Stilgar, saw the relief in him as he tugged at his beard with a deeply veined hand. She heard muttering awareness spread through the troop. "That's why you asked him to yield," Stilgar said. "I see. Our ways are different, but you'll see the sense in them. I thought we'd admitted a scorpion into our midst," he hesitated. "Then, and I shall not call you lad the more." A voice from the troop called out, "Needs a naming, still." Stilgar nodded, tugging at his beard. "I see strength in you, like the strength beneath a pillar." Again he paused, then, "You shall be known among us as Usul, the base of the pillar. This is your secret name, your troop name. We have sieged Herbert may use it, but none other may so presume. Usul." Murmuring went through the troop. Good choice, that. Strong. Bring us luck. And Jessica sensed the acceptance, knowing she was included in it with her champion. She was indeed Sayadina. "Now, what name of manhood do you choose for us to call you openly?" Stilgar asked. Paul glanced at his mother, back to Stilgar. Bits and pieces of this moment registered on his prescient memory, but he felt the differences as though they were physical, a pressure forcing him through the narrow door of the present. "How do you call among you the little mouse, the mouse that jumps?" Paul asked, remembering the pop-hop of motion at Tuono Basin. He illustrated with one hand. A chuckle sounded through the troop. "We call that one Muad'Dib," Stilgar said. Jessica gasped. It was the name Paul had told her, saying that the Fremen would accept them and call him thus. She felt a sudden fear of her son and for him. Paul swallowed. He thought that he played a part already played over countless times in his mind. Yet, there were differences. He could see himself perched on a dizzying summit, having experienced much and possessed a profound store of knowledge, but all around him was abyss. And again he remembered the vision of fanatic legions following the green and black banner of the Atreides, pillaging and burning across the universe in the name of their prophet Muad'Dib. That must not happen, he told himself. "Is that the name you wish, Muad'Dib?" Stilgar asked. "I am an Atreides," Paul whispered, and then louder, "It's not right that I give up entirely the name my father gave me." "Could I be known among you as Paul Muad'Dib?" "You are Paul Muad'Dib," Stilgar said, and Paul thought, that was in no vision of mine. I did a different thing. But he felt that the abyss remained all around him. Again a murmuring response went through the troop as man turned to man. Wisdom with strength. Couldn't ask more. It's the legend for sure. Lisan al-Gaib. Lisan al-Gaib. "I will tell you a thing about your new name," Stilgar said. "The choice pleases us. Muad'Dib is wise in the ways of the desert. Muad'Dib creates his own water. Muad'Dib hides from the sun and travels in the cool night. Muad'Dib is fruitful and multiplies over the land. Muad'Dib we call instructor of boys. That is a powerful base on which to build your life, Paul Muad'Dib, who is Usul among us. We welcome you." Stilgar touched Paul's forehead with one palm, withdrew his hand, embraced Paul, and murmured, "Usul." As Stilgar released him, another member of the troop embraced Paul, repeating his new troop name, and Paul was passed from embrace to embrace through the troop, hearing the voices, the shadings of tone, Usul, Usul, Usul. Already he could place some of them by name, and there was Chani, who pressed her cheek against his as she held him and said his name. Presently Paul stood again before Stilgar, who said, "Now you are of the Ikhwan Bedouin, our brother."
His face hardened, and he spoke of command in his voice. And now, Paul Muad'Dib, tighten up that stillsuit. He glanced at Chani. Chani, Paul Muad'Dib's nose plugs are as poor a fit as I've ever seen. I thought I ordered you to see after him. I hadn't the makings still, she said. There's Jamis, of course, but enough of that. Then I'll share one of mine, she said. I can make do with one until... You will not, Stilgar said. I know there are spares among us. Where are the spares? Are we a troop together or a band of savages? Hands reached out from the troop offering hard, fibrous objects. Stilgar selected 4, handed them to Chani. Fit these to Yusul and the Sayadina. A voice lifted from the back of the troop. What of the water still? What of the Lita-Johns in their pack? I know your need, Ferrock, Stilgar said. He glanced at Jessica. She nodded. Purge one for those that need it, Stilgar said. Watermaster. Where is a watermaster? Ah, Shamoom, care for the measuring of what is needed, for necessity and no more. This water is the dower property of the Sayadina and will be repaid in the siege at field rates less pack fees. What is this repayment at field rates? Jessica asked. 10 for 1, Stilgar said. But it's a wise rule, as you'll come to see, Stilgar said. A rustling of robes marked movement at the back of the troop as men turned to get the water. Stilgar held up a hand, and there was silence. As to Jamis, he said, I ordered the full ceremony. Jamis was our companion and brother of the Ikwan Bedouin. There shall be no turning away without the respect due one who proved our fortune by his Tahadi challenge. I invoke the right at sunset when the dark shall cover him. Paul, hearing these words, realized that he had plunged once more into the abyss. Blind time. There was no past occupying the future in his mind. Except, he could still sense the green and black Atreides banner waving, somewhere ahead, still see the Jihad's bloody swords and fanatic legions. It will not be, he told himself. I cannot let it be. God created Arrakis to train the faithful, from the wisdom of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. In the stillness of the cavern, Jessica heard the scrape of sand on rock as people moved. The distant bird calls that Stilgar had said were the signals of his watchmen. The great plastic hood seals had been removed from the cave's openings. She could see the march of evening shadows across the lip of rock in front of her and the open bays and beyond. She sensed the daylight leaving them, sensed it in the dry heat as well as the shadows. She knew her trained awareness soon would give her what these Fremen obviously had, the ability to sense even the slightest change in the air's moisture. How they had scurried to tighten their still suits when the cave was opened. Deep within the cave, someone began chanting, Ima Trava Okolo, I Korenja Okolo. Jessica translated silently. These are ashes, and these are roots. The funeral ceremony for Jamis was beginning. She looked out at the Arrakeen sunset, at the banked decks of colour in the sky. Night was beginning to utter its shadows along the distant rocks and the dunes. Yet the heat persisted. Heat forced her thoughts onto water and the observed fact that this whole people could be trained to be first during their given times. First. She could remember moonlit waves on Caladan throwing white robes over rocks, and the wind heavy with dampness. How the breeze that fingered her robes seared the patches of exposed skin at cheeks and forehead. For new nose plugs irritated her, and she found herself overly conscious of the tube that trailed down across her face into the suit, recovering her breath's moisture. The suit itself was a sweatbox. Your suit will be more comfortable when you've adjusted to lower water content in your body, Stilgar had said. She knew he was right, but the knowledge made this moment no more comfortable. The unconscious preoccupation of water here weighed on her mind. No, she corrected herself, it was preoccupation with moisture. That was a more subtle and profound matter. She heard approaching footsteps, turned to see Paul come out of the cave steps, trailed by the elfin-faced Chani. There's another thing, Jessica thought. Paul must be cautioned about their women. One of these desert women would not do as wife to a duke. As concubine, yes, but not as wife. And she wondered at herself, thinking, have I been infected with his schemes? And she saw how well she had been conditioned. I can think of the marital needs of royalty without once weighing my own concubinage. Yet, I was more than concubine. Mother. Paul stopped in front of her. Chani stood at his elbow. Mother, do you know what they're doing back there? Jessica looked at the dark patch of his eye staring out from the hood. I think so. Chani showed me, because I'm supposed to see it and give my permission for the weighing of the water. Jessica looked at Chani. They're recovering Jamis water, Chani said, and her thin voice came out nasal past the nose plugs. It's the rule. The flesh belongs to the person, but his water belongs to the tribe, except in the combat. They say the water's mine, Paul said. Jessica wondered why this should make her suddenly alert and cautious. Combat water belongs to the winner, Chani said. It's because you have to fight in the open without still suits. The winner has to get his water back that he loses while fighting. I don't want his water, Paul muttered. He felt that he was a part of many images moving simultaneously in a fragmenting way that was disconcerting to the inner eye. He could not be certain what he would do, but of one thing he was positive. He did not want the water distilled out of Jamis' flesh. It's water, Chani said.
Jessica marvelled at the way she said it. Water. So much meaning in a simple sound. A Bene Gesserit axiom came to Jessica's mind. Survival is the ability to swim in strange water. And Jessica thought, Paul and I, we must face the currents and patterns in these strange waters, if we're to survive. You will accept the water, Jessica said. She recognized the tone in her voice. She had used that same tone once of Leto, telling her lost duke that he would accept a large sum offered for his support in a questionable venture, because money maintained power for the Atreides. On Arrakis, water was money. She saw that clearly. Paul remained silent, knowing then that he would do as she ordered, not because she ordered it, but because her tone of voice had forced him to reevaluate. To refuse the water would be to break with accepted Fremen practice. Presently, Paul recalled the words of 467 Kalima in Yua's OC Bible. He said, "From water does all life begin." Jessica stared at him. Where did he learn that quotation? She asked herself. He hasn't studied the mysteries. Thus it is spoken, Chani said. Gyodicha Mantin, it is written in the Shahnameh that water was the first of all things created. For no reason she could explain, and this bothered her more than the sensation, Jessica suddenly shuddered. She turned away to hide her confusion and was just in time to see the sunset. A violent calamity of colour spilled over the sky as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. It is time. The voice of Stilgar's ringing in the cavern. Jamis' weapon has been killed. Jamis has been called by him, the Shai Hulud, who has ordained the phases for the moons that daily wane and, in the end, appear as bent and withered twigs. Stilgar's voice lowered. Thus it is with Jamis. Silence fell like a blanket on the cavern. Jessica saw the grey shadow movement of Stilgar like a ghost figure within the inner reaches. She glanced at the basin, sensing the coolness. The friends of Jamis will approach, Stilgar said. Men moved behind Jessica, dropping a curtain across the opening. A single glow globe was lighted overhead far back in the cave. Its yellow glow picked out an inflowing of human figures. Jessica heard the rustling of the robes. Chinese took a step away as though pulled by the light. Jessica bent close to Paul's ear, speaking in the family code. Follow their lead, do as they do. It will be a simple ceremony to placate the shade of Jamis. It will be more than that, Paul thought, and he felt a wrenching sensation within his awareness as though he were trying to grasp something in motion and render it motionless. Chani glided back to Jessica's side, took her hand. Come, Sayadina, we must sit apart. Paul watched them move off into the shadows, leaving him alone. He felt abandoned. The men who had fixed the curtain came up beside him. Come, Yusul. He allowed himself to be guided forward, to be pushed into a circle of people being formed around Stilgar, who had stood beneath the glow globe and beside a bundled, curving and angular shape gathered beneath a robe on the rock floor. The troop crouched, down at a gesture from Stilgar, their robes hissing with the movement. Paul settled with them, watching Stilgar, noting the way the overhead globe made pits of his eyes and brightened the touch of green fabric at his neck. Paul shifted his attention to the robe-covered mound at Stilgar's feet, recognized the handle of a balisette protruding from the fabric. The spirit leaves the body's water when the first moon rises, Stilgar intoned. Thus it is spoken. When we see the first moon rise this night, whom will it summon? Jamis, the troop responded. Stilgar turned full circle on one heel, passing his gaze across the ring of faces. I was a friend of Jamis, he said. When the hawk plane stooped up on us at hole in the rock, it was Jamis pulled me to safety. He bent over the pile beside him, lifted away the robe. I take this robe as a friend of Jamis. Leader's right. He draped the robe over his shoulder, straightening. Now Paul saw the contents of the mount exposed, the pale glistening grey of a still-suit, a battered leader-john, a kerchief with a small book in its centre, the bladeless handle of a crier's knife, an empty sheath, a folded pack, a power compass, a distrans, a thumper, a pile of fist-sized metallic hooks, an assortment of what looked like small rocks within a field of cloth, a clump of bundled feathers, and the balisette exposed beside the folded pack. So Jamis played the balisette, Paul thought. The instrument reminded him of Gurney Halleck and all that was lost. Paul knew with his memory of the future, in the past, that some chance lines could produce a meeting of Halleck, but the reunions were few and shadowed. They puzzled him. The uncertainty factor touched him with wonder. Does it mean that something I will do, that I may do, could destroy Gurney, or bring him back to life? Or... Paul swallowed, shook his head. Again, Stilgar bent over the mound. For Jamis' woman and for the guards, he said. The small rocks and the book were taken into the folds of his robe. Leader's right, the troop intoned. The mark of a Jamis coffee service, Stilgar said, and he lifted a flat disc of green metal. That it shall be given to Yusul in suitable ceremony when we return to the siege. Leader's right, the troop intoned. Lastly, he took the crier's knife handle and stood with it. For the funeral plane, he said. For the funeral plane, the troop responded. At her place in the circle across from Paul, Jessica nodded, recognizing the ancient source of the rite, and she thought, the meeting between ignorance and knowledge, between brutality and culture, it begins in the dignity with which we treat our dead. She looked across at Paul, wondering, will he see it? Will he know what to do? We are friends of Jamis, Stilgar said. We are not wailing for our dead like a pack of Garvag. A grey-bearded man to Paul's left stood up. I was a friend of Jamis, he said. He crossed to the mound, lifted the distrans. When our water went below Minim at the siege of Two Birds, Jamis shared. The man returned to his place in the circle. Am I supposed to say I was a friend of Jamis? Paul wondered. Do they expect me to take something from that pile? He saw faces turn toward him, turn away. They expected. Another man across from Paul arose, went to the pack and removed the power compass. I was a friend of Jamis, he said. When the patrol caught us at Bight of the Cliff, and I was wounded, Jamis drew them off so the wounded could be saved. He returned to his place in the circle. Again the faces turned toward Paul, and he saw the expectancy in them, lowered his eyes. An elbow nudged him and a voice hissed, Would you bring the destruction on us? How can I say I was his friend? Paul wondered. Another figure arose from the circle opposite Paul, and as the hooded face came into the light, he recognized his mother. She removed a kerchief from the mound. I was a friend of Jamis, she said. When the spirit of spirits within him saw the needs of truth, that spirit withdrew and spared my son. She returned to her place, and Paul recalled the scorn in his mother's voice as she had confronted him after the fight. How does it feel to be a killer? Again, he saw the faces turn toward him, felt the anger and fear in the troop. A passage his mother had once film booked for him on the cult of the dead flickered through Paul's mind. He knew what he had to do. Slowly Paul got to his feet. A sigh passed around the circle. Paul felt the diminishment of himself as he advanced into the centre of the circle. He was as though he lost a fragment of himself and sought it here. He bent over the mound of belongings, lifted out the balisette. A string twanged softly as it strung against something in the pile. I was a friend of Jamis, Paul whispered. He felt tears burning his eyes, forced more volume into his voice. Jamis taught me that when you kill, you pay for it. I wish I'd known Jamis better. Finally, he groped his way back to his place in the circle, sank to the rock floor. A voice hissed. He sheds tears. It was taken up around the ring. Usul gives moisture to the dead. He felt fingers touch his damp cheek, heard the awed whispers. Jessica, hearing the voices, felt the depth of the experience, realized what terrible inhibitions there must be against shedding tears. She focused on the words. He gives moisture to the dead. It was a gift to the shadow world. Tears. They would be sacred beyond a doubt. Nothing on this planet had so forcefully hammered into her the ultimate value of water. Not the water sellers, not the dried skins of the natives, not still suits of the rules of water discipline. Here there was a substance more precious than all others. It was life itself, and entwined all around of symbolism and ritual. Water. I touched his cheek, someone whispered. I felt the gift. At first, the fingers touching his face frightened Paul. He clutched the cold handle of the balisette, feeling the strings bite his palm. Then he saw the faces beyond the groping hands, the eyes wide and wondering. Presently the hands withdrew. The funeral ceremony resumed, but now there was a subtle space around Paul, a drawing back, as the troop honoured him by a respectful isolation. The ceremony ended with a low chant. Full moon calls thee, Shai Halud shalt thou see, red the night, dusky sky, bloody death didst thou die. We pray to a moon, she is round, luck with us will then abound, what we seek for shall be found in the land of solid ground. A bulging sack remained at Stilgar's feet. He crouched, placed his palms against it. Someone came up beside him, crouched at his elbow, and Paul recognized Chani's face in the hood shadow. Jamis carried 33 litres and 7 3/32 drachms of the tribe's water, Chani said. I bless it now in the presence of a Sayadina, a Keri Akairi, this is the water, Philisin Fallacy of Paul Muad'Dib, Kivi Akavi, nevermore, Nakalas, to be measured and counted, Uker and by the heartbeats Jan of our friend Jamis. In an abrupt and profound silence, Chani turned, stared at Paul. Presently she said, Where I am flame, be thou the coals. Where I am dew, be thou the water. Be Lal Kaifa, intoned the troop. To Paul Muad'Dib goes this portion, Chani said. May he guard it for the tribe, preserving it against careless loss. May he be generous with it in time of need. May he pass it on in his time for the good of the tribe. By Lal Kaifa, intoned the troop. I must accept that water, Paul thought. Slowly he rose, made his way to Chani's side. Stilgar stepped back to make room for him. He took the balisette gently from his hand. Kneel, Chani said. Paul knelt. She guided his hands to the water bag, held them against the resilient surface. With this water the tribe entrusts thee, she said. Jamis is gone from it. Take it in peace. She stood, pulling Paul up with her. Stilgar returned to the balisette, extended a small pile of metal rings in one palm. Paul looked at them, seeing the different sizes, the way the light of the globe reflected off them. Chani took the largest ring, held it on a finger. 30 litres, she said. One by one she took the others, showing each to Paul, counting them. 2 litres, 1 litre, 7 water counters of each drachm each, 1 water counter of 33 seconds drachms. In all, 33 litres and 7 and 30 seconds drachms. She held them up on her fingers for Paul to see. Do you accept them? Stilgar asked. Paul swallowed, nodded. Yes. Later, Chani said, I'll show you how to tie them in a kerchief so they won't rattle and give you away when you need silence. She extended her hand. Will you hold them for me? Paul asked. Chani turned a startled glance on Stilgar. He smiled, said, Muad'Dib. Paul Muad'Dib, who is useful, does not yet know our race, Chani. Hold his water counters without commitment until it's time to show him the manner of carrying them. She nodded, whipped a ribbon of cloth from beneath her robe, linked the rings onto it with an intricate over and under weaving, hesitated, then stuffed them into the sash beneath her robe. I missed something there, Paul thought. He sensed the feeling of humour around him, something bantering in it, and his mind linked up a prescient memory. Water counters offered to a woman. Courtship ritual. Water masters, Stilgar said. The troop arose in a hissing of robes. 2 men stepped out, lifted the water bag. Stilgar took down the globe, led the way with it into the depths of the cave. Paul was pressed in behind Chani, noted the buttery glow of light over rock walls, the way the shadows danced, and he felt the troop's lift of spirits contained in a hushed air of expectancy. Jessica, pulled into the end of the troop by eager hands, hemmed around by jostling bodies, suppressed a moment of panic. She had recognized fragments of the ritual, identified the shards of Chekhovsa and Botani Jib in the words, and she knew the wild violence that could explode out of these seemingly simple moments. Jan, 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 she thought. Go, go, go. It was like a child's game that had lost all inhibition in adult hands. Stilgar stopped at a yellow rock wall. He pressed an outcropping and the wall swung silently away from him, opening along an irregular crack. He led the way through past a dark honeycomb lattice that directed a cool wash of air across Paul when he passed it. Paul turned a questioning stare on Chani, tugged her arm. That air felt damp, he said. Shh, she whispered, but a man behind them said, Plenty of moisture in the trap tonight. Jamis' way of telling us he's satisfied. Jessica passed through the secret door, heard it close behind. She saw how the Fremen slowed while passing the honeycomb ladders, felt the dampness of the air as she came opposite it. Wind trap, she thought. They have a concealed wind trap somewhere on the surface to funnel air down here into cooler regions and precipitate the moisture from it. They passed through another rock door with lattice work above it, and the door closed behind them. The draught of air at their backs carried a sensation of moisture clearly perceptible to both Jessica and Paul. At the head of the troop, the glow globe in Stilgar's hands dropped below the level of the heads in front of Paul. Presently he felt steps beneath his feet, curving down to the left. Light reflected back up across hooded heads in a winding movement of people spiraling down the steps. Jessica sensed mounting tension in the people around her, a pressure of silence that rasped her nerves of its urgency. The steps ended and the troop passed through another low door. The light of the glow globe was swallowed in a great open space of a high curved ceiling. Paul felt Chani's hand on his arm, heard a faint dripping sound in the chill air, felt an utter stillness come over the Fremen in the cathedral presence of water. I've seen this place in a dream, he thought. The thought was both reassuring and frustrating. Somewhere ahead of him on this path, the fantastic hordes cut their glory path across the universe in his name. The green and black Atreides banner would become a symbol of terror. Wild legions would charge into battle screaming their war cry. Muad'Dib. It must not be, he thought. I cannot let it happen. But he could feel the demanding race consciousness within him, his own terrible purpose, and he knew that no small thing could deflect the juggernaut. It was gathering weight and momentum. If he died this instant, the thing would go on through his mother and his unborn sister. Nothing less than the deaths of all the troop gathered here and now, himself and his mother included, could stop the thing. Paul stared around him, saw the troop spread out in a line. They pressed him forward against a low barrier carved from native rock. Beyond the barrier in the glow of Stilgar's globe, Paul saw an unruffled dark surface of water. It stretched away into shadows, deep and black, the far wall only faintly visible, perhaps 100 meters away. Jessica felt the dry pulling of skin on her cheeks and forehead, relaxing in the presence of moisture. The water pool was deep. She could sense its deepness and resisted a desire to dip her hands into it. A splashing sounded on her left. She looked down the shadowy line of Fremen, saw Stilgar with Paul standing beside him and the water masters emptying their load into the pool through a flow meter. The meter was the round grey eye above the pool's rim. She saw its glowing pointer move as the water flowed through it, saw the pointer stop at 33 litres, 7 and 33 seconds drachms. Superb accuracy in water measurement, Jessica thought, and she noted that the walls of the meter trough held no trace of moisture after the water's passage. The water flowed off these walls without binding tension. She saw a profound clue to Fremen technology in the simple fact they were perfectionists. Jessica worked her way down the barrier to Stilgar's side. Way was made for her with casual courtesy. She noted the withdrawn look in Paul's eyes, but the mastery of this great pool of water dominated her thoughts. Stilgar looked at her. There were those among us in need of water, he said, yet they would come here and not touch this water. Do you know that? I believe it, she said. He looked at the pool. We have more than 38 million decaliters here, he said, walled off from the little makers, hidden and preserved. A treasure trove, she said. Stilgar lifted the globe to look into her eyes. It is greater than treasure. We have thousands of such caches. Only a few of us know them all. He cocked his head to one side. The globe cast a yellow-shadowed glow across face and beard. Hear that? They listened. The dripping of water precipitated from the wind trap filled the room with its presence. Jessica saw that the entire troop was caught up in a rapture of listening. Only Paul seemed to stand remote from it. To Paul, the sound was like moments ticking away. He could feel time flowing through him, the instants never to be recaptured. He sensed a need for decision, but felt powerless to move. It has been calculated with precision, Stilgar whispered. We know to within 1 million decaliters how much we need. When we have it, we shall change the face of Arrakis. A hushed whisper of response lifted from the troop. By Lal Kaifa. We will trap the dunes beneath grass plantings, Stilgar said, his voice growing stronger. We will tie the water into the soil with trees and undergrowth. By Lal Kaifa, intoned for troop. Each year the polar ice retreats, Stilgar said. By Lal Kaifa, they chanted. We will make a homeworld of Arrakis, with melting lenses at the poles, with lakes in the temperate zones, and only the deep desert for the Maker and his spice. By Lal Kaifa. And no man ever again shall want for water. It shall be his for dipping from well or pond or lake or canal. It shall run down through the qanats to feed our plants. It shall be there for any man to take. It shall be his for holding out his hand. By Lal Kaifa. Jessica felt the religious ritual in the words, noted her own instinctively awed response. They're in league with the future, she thought. They have their mountain to climb. This is the scientist's dream. And these simple people, these peasants, are filled with it. Her thoughts turned to Liet Kynes, the Emperor's planetary ecologist, the man who had gone native, and she wondered at him. This was a dream to capture men's souls, and she could sense the hand of the ecologist in it. This was a dream for which men would die willingly. It was another of the essential ingredients that she felt her son needed. People with a goal. Such people would be easy to imbue with fervour and fanaticism. They could be wielded like a sword to win back Paul's place for him. We leave now, Stilgar said, and wait for the first moon's rising. When Jamis is safely on his way, we will go home. Whispering their reluctance, the troop fell in behind him, turned back along the water barrier and up the stairs. And Paul, walking behind Chani, felt that a vital moment had passed him, that he had missed an essential decision and was now caught up in his own myth. He knew he had seen this place before, experienced it in a fragment of prescient dream on faraway Caladan, but details of the place were being filled in now that he had not seen. He felt a new sense of wonder at the limits of his gift. It was as though he rode within the wave of time, sometimes in its trough, sometimes on a crest, and all around him the other waves lifted and fell, revealing and then hiding what they bore on their surface. Through it all, the wild jihad still loomed ahead of him, the violence and the slaughter. It was like a promontory above the surf. The troop filed through the last door into the main cavern. The door was sealed. Lights were extinguished, hoods removed from the cavern openings, revealing the night and the stars that had come over the desert. Jessica moved to the dry lip of the cavern's edge, looked up at the stars. They were sharp and near. She felt the stirring of the troop around her, heard the sound of a balisset being tuned somewhere behind her, and Paul's voice humming the pitch. There was a melancholy in his tone that she did not like. Chani's voice intruded from the deep cave darkness. Tell me about the waters of your birth world, Paul Muad'Dib. And Paul, another time, Chani, I promise. Such sadness. It's a good balisset, Chani said. Very good, Paul said. Do you think Jamis will mind my using it? He speaks of the dead in the present tense, Jessica thought. The implications disturbed her. A man's voice intruded. He liked music betimes. Jamis did. Then sing me one of your songs, Chani pleaded. Such feminine allure in that girl-child's voice, Jessica thought. I must caution Paul about their women, and soon. This was a song of a friend of mine, Paul said. I expect he's dead now, Gurney is. He called it his even song. The troop grew still, listening as Paul's voice lifted in a sweet boy tenor with the balisette tinkling and strumming beneath it. This clear time of seeing embers, a gold bright sun's lost in first dusk, what frenzied senses, desperate musk, a consort of remembering. Jessica felt the verbal music in her breast, pagan and charged with sounds that made her suddenly and intensely aware of herself, feeling her own body and its needs. She listened to the tense stillness. Night's pearl censored requiem, 'tis for us. What joys run then, bright in your eyes? What flower-spangled amours pull at our hearts? What flower-spangled amours fill our desires? And Jessica heard the after-stillness that hummed in the air with the last note. Why does my son sing a love song to that girl child? She asked herself. She felt an abrupt fear. She could sense life flowing around her, and she had no grasp on its reins. Why did he choose that song? She wondered. The instincts are true sometimes. Why did he do this? Paul sat silently in the darkness, a single stark thought dominating his awareness. My mother is my enemy. She does not know it, but she is. She is bringing the jihad. She bore me. She trained me. She is my enemy.